I want to go back to redemption and amends a moment. You asked me a question. You're intrigued by if you don't have the specific skills, that certain skill set of of the guy riding in on the white horse saving the world. How do you do that? And um, personally, I've been in enough jams in my life, um, which may explain a little bit of how I ended up in Alaska. But I've been involved in enough really difficult situations in my life. I've had the luxury of going head to head with the Russian mafia in a couple of situations when I was working over there. Um, you know, I've I've had my share of problems in San Francisco years and years ago with street crime. I'm one of the few people I know that's ever literally faced down a charging grizzly bear. Um, and the, the answer to your question is, um, if you can't do it yourself, you find people to help you. Mm-hmm. So in each of my books, a team is quietly assembled. If they don't know they're a team when they start, but the one person with an idea asking a question leads to another person saying, well, I may have an answer. And that question then leads to perhaps a third person. But and you're right. I mean, somewhere along the line, you have to have the skills. If somebody's going to have to survive in a shootout, somebody's got to know how to handle a weapon. Or if they're going to end up in court, they've got to figure out they have to have the skills to survive in a court case. Or if they're at sea in a bobbing raft, they've got to know how to attract some help. But I guess a lot of what I write becomes very personal in that I don't remember ever being, well, maybe once or twice in my life, but ever being very many jams in my life where I got out of it by myself. And so I like to write about that. I like that, and I think it kind of touches on where you started our conversation in humanity and how we seem to be drifting further and further apart, and how important it is that we get back together. And one of the most important things is that you reach out, to your neighbor, and if you really expect that some guy is going to come charging in on a white steed and save you, the odds are pretty damn good that you're not going to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. In real life, that's just
not going to happen. Yep. So, did you have any other things that you wanted to really follow up on or talk about in this? Anything that you're doing right now that the world needs to hear about?
Well, actually, I was just thinking from what you were just saying then about even if it's not like an organized structural team, like in a detective's department or whatever. If you assemble your characters in a way that they operate as a team, I think that's really interesting from the sort of the craft of writing, because there are lots of time. I mean, you have people like that, they call them the lone wolf heroes, don't they? Where you couldn't really at some point change course and have them, although, with Reacher, there's been a couple of times, I think Bad Luck and Trouble was an example where, he put his old team back together from the army. So, people do enjoy that kind of thing from time to time. But, generally speaking, once you've set the mold that, this is somebody who operates alone, that's what people have come to expect. But, I'm very interested in that because I had a concept for some books a few years ago where I wanted to, I wanted it to be like an ensemble cast of characters. I wanted them to overtly be a team. Quite clearly, a leader, other people in the team with specific skills, strengths and weaknesses. And in order for them to, no one of them could succeed. They could only succeed if they work together so that they mesh and they form a coherent whole. And, the idea was that in different books, some of them, one book, character A would take the lead and be the focus, then character, and so on, so that it's just not the same exact pattern every time, but you'd have the same palette, you'd have the same ingredients, just in different proportions. And I was really excited about it. I've done quite a bit of work on it. I've still got at home quite a few notes on it. But at the time, I could not find a publisher who was interested. They would not back the idea of a sort of an ensemble. It had to be about one main character, and so I think that was a shame. And I really like what you do, because I think it is much more interesting and much more realistic. Because you're right, in life, unless you are severely troubled, you are going to have a network of people around you, be they family, friends, colleagues, neighbors. And so exploring that in fiction, I think, is a really good way of making it relatable and realistic.
Yeah, I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to write that, and you probably will. And if you ever decide to do that, I'd love to chat with you about it along the way.